Hey guys, in this video we'll be continuing with the Python video tutorials. We'll be displaying an exception's default error message. So when an exception is thrown, an object known as an exception object is created in memory. The exception object usually contains a default error message pertaining to the exception. So it's the same message that is displayed at the end of a traceback. Excuse me. So when an exception goes unhandled, that the traceback shows the exception object message, or it's the same message in an exception object that an exception object has. So we'll just do a few examples. So when you write an except clause, you can optionally assign the exception object to a variable, such as accept value error as ERR, as error. So basically it kind of saves the exception object is basically points to a variable. Like the exception object, once you write that statement, it then points to a variable pretty much. So let's just do an example. So we'll have a just a def main again. So we'll have a try block. So we'll just have hours worked, points to int casted to the input function. We'll just have a string prompt. How many hours did you work? Question, new line. So we'll have a pay rate as well. We'll say pay rate points to a float. So casted float to the input function. What is the pay rate? New line. So then we'll have a gross pay variable. So a gross pay variable, and then we'll point it to hours worked times pay rate. Then we'll just print out the data. So we'll just have gross pay shift semicolon $, then we'll get out of this string. Then we'll pass the format function. Format will format gross pay, comma, in the string. Literal will have comma dot 2f. On the next line we'll have we have to get out of the indentation. So we'll get out of the indentation and we'll have an accept block. Accept, we'll accept value error. We'll say as ERR, as error. So we'll name the value error object as ERR basically. Then we can print out ERR, which is going to print out the exception message. Basically the default exception message in the traceback from value error. So it's kind of like get message in Java pretty much. So it gets the exception. This is one way to get the exception message. And then after that, we'll get out of the main. We'll get out of the main function, then we'll call main. Something missing here. Did I miss? No. What's wrong with this? Gross pay. Oh, whoops, that's my bad. So just we can take gross pay and then put gross pay like with a camel case. So gross pay and then a camel case. That should be all. So we'll just save, and so basically we're catching a value error, which is like a type mismatch. So this, we're going to want to convert this data to an int or to a float. So hours worked is going to be an int, pay rate's going to be a float. So if we run that, how many hours did you work? So if I just put 20, hit enter, what is the pay rate? 20. We get a value, but if I rerun that, I type in the string 20, invalid literal for int with base 10 20. So it gives us the exception object. So the value error exception object was the message that it was holding was printed out. So the exception object message from value error was printed out, basically. So basically the accept clause caught a value error exception. The expression that appears after the accept clause specifies that we are assigning the exception object to the variable ERR. There's nothing special about the name ERR, so it's just a normal. You could have named it whatever you want. Exception 1, exception 2, value exception, whatever you want. So in the exception, so after that, in the exception handler, you can pass ERR to the print function to display the default error message that Python provides for that type of error. So that's it. So if you want to just have one except clause to catch all the exceptions that are raised in a try suite, as we did, you can specify exception as a type. Okay, so what's going to happen here is basically instead of saying that, so over here when we said accept value error as ERR, we can just say that we can say that, okay, well, we want to accept just a default exception, which is basically any exception. So we can just call exception like that with a capital E. That's just going to be, it's basically going to handle any exception. So it's like a default case again. So it handles any exception, whether it's IO exception type, exception type mismatch, value error, whatever, file not found, anything. It's going to be just it's going to be handled as an exception, and it's going to print out the message. So let's just test that here. I think this should work too. So how many hours did you work? So we'll just say let's just say 20 again. So it tells you what it is in this case. So it actually catches whatever exception it is and prints out the message for it. So it's you don't have to specify what message you want to print out. It'll tell you anything that happens, basically. So the code that I actually had here, which was the one from that we did in the last video with the total points to 0.0. We try to open the file, convert the data to a float with the 4-line and in file statement. And then we try to convert the data to a float or an int, but in that case, in that file, if you guys have been following the series, in that file.txt we have a string for the first line, which is code, like just a string code, capital C, C-O-D-E, and it tries to convert that to a float or an int. In that case, it raised value error, I believe, because it was a type mismatch. And then basically the same thing is going to happen here. It's just going to handle it as an exception and print ERR, which is going to print out the message that the exception object has. So in that case, it prints out any exception that is raised, any object message, any exception object message that is raised. So that's pretty much it. I don't think we really need to write that code out again. I just explained it, same idea exactly as here. No need to write that code out again, we already did. If you haven't seen that video, just go back a few videos. Try to watch the whole series if you can. That way I explain each step, each part step by step. So in the next video we'll be going over the else clause, referring to exceptions. So I'll show you guys some examples. So hope to see you there. If you guys like the video, you can subscribe and like the video. You can subscribe to the channel if you'd like for more programming tutorials, more languages, and investing stuff as well. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.